Bruchim haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Chof Zayin Amud Beis. Starting with Daf Chof Zayin Amud Aleph, 5 lines from the bottom. The Gemara previously had quoted a brisa in regards to when one uses the Isser Hana of Orla or Kilei Akerim as a fuel for an oven. The bread that is baked from that fueled oven, is it going to then cause that bread to be Aser Bahana or not? Rebbe says it is Aser Bahana because the Shvach Eitzim goes into the bread. That means that the Isser Hana that was used for the fuel is now entering the bread, causing the bread to be Aser Bahana. The Chachamim argue and say once that fuel has already been burnt, the Eitzim from either the Orla or the Kilei Akerim, that already renders it not Aser Bahana, and therefore there's no Isser inside of that bread. However, once it becomes coals, then everybody agrees if you have bread that bakes on those coals, that is no longer Aser Bahana, and the bread is mutter. And that's what the Gemara quotes now. The safe of that brisa, Bishla, Al Gabe Gecholim, Divrei Hakol Hapas Muteres. If it is baked on that which is already now rendered into coals, then it is no longer Aser Bahana, and therefore the bread is mutter, according to everybody, including Rebbe. Says the Gemara, Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Rabbi Chia Bar Ashi Amar Rabbi Yochanan. There are two different sages that made two different statements. Chad Omar Lo Shonu Ela Gecholim Oimemois, Aval Gecholim Lo Chashois Asurim. One of them said that we're talking about coals that have then gone out. They became dimmed. That's when we're talking about that is going to be mutter according to everybody, including Rebbe. However, if there are coals that are still aflame, they're still flickering, that will be also according to Rebbe. Whereas the other one says, no, even if it's going to be a gecholim, the coals are going to be flickering, still Rebbe would say that this bread is mutter. That means that the flickering flame that is going on in the coals no longer is Aser Bahana, even according to Rebbe, according to this statement. The Gemara asks, Bishlama Lamanda Omar Lo Chashois Asurin Mishum Diyeshvach Eitim Bapas. The one who says that we're talking about the coals that are still flickering is Aser because we understand, because that fuel goes into the bread. It's Shvach Eitzim, which now renders the bread into an Isser of Hana as well. But according to the other opinion, the other statement that says that even if it's going to be flickering types of coals, it still is mutter. The bread can be eaten even according to Rebbe. Pas the Aser diye Shvach Eitzim, but pas la Rebbe hechi mishkach asle. Then what would be the case of pas being fueled by Isser Hana? That should be Aser. If it's anyways talking about such coals that are still in the midst of fueling the pas, because they're flickering, they're still very strong in terms of that fuel. If you're going to say that that is mutter, is no longer Aser Bahana, then what is the case of burning wood that would, yes, cause an Isser Hana on the bread? Rav Papa explains where there is a burning flame that is still opposite the bread that is being baked. That's when it's going to be considered to be Shvach Eitzim that enters into the bread, causing an Isser Hana, according to Rebbe. On top of Chof Zayin Amud Beis, Michlal says the Gemara de Rabbanon de Pligi Alei Shoru Afilu Kishavuka Kinegdo. That then follows that the Rabban who are arguing on Rebbe say that even when the flame is opposite the baking of that bread, it's still mutter. It doesn't go into the bread. Then when will be a case of the eitzim that would, yes, be Aser Bahana according to Rabbanon? Rabbi Ami Bar Chama Bishar Shifa. If we're talking about a chair made out of wood that is Aser Bahana, then one cannot sit on it, or you can't use it as a footstool. Boy Mine Rami Bar Chama Rav Chisda. he asked the following question from Chisda. Tanur, shehisiku ba'atzei hekdesh ve'ofa boy hapas. If you have an oven that was fueled up with atzei hekdesh, and you bake bread with that atzei hekdesh, l'rabbanan deshor become maisamai. Those, at opinion of the Rabbanan who said in the previous case, gabe the orla and the kilei akerim, which is used to fuel the oven, there they said that the pas is mutter, because the shvach eitzim, they said, is not what's entering into the bread. It's already mutter behana. So then what would they hold in regard to the eitzim of atzei hekdesh? Omar lei hapas asura. Rav Chisda answered that the pas would be rendered prohibited. It's aser bahana. Asked the Gemara, my bein zela arla. What is the difference between this and the case before? The case before of Orla and Kilei Akerim. There the Rabbanan say it is mutter. Because again, once he's burning that type of atzim, that eitzim is no longer rendered aser bahana, and therefore does not go into the bread as an iser hana. Why over here, by then hekdesh, the atzei hekdesh is yes considered to be going into the bread to aser and being aser bahana? Omar Rave responds, Hachi hashta, what kind of comparison between the orla and the hekdesh? Orla b'teila b'masayim, when you have 200 of heter keneged the one of orla, it's mevatel the orla. Afilu, whereas hekdesh afilu be'elef loy batil. Whereas when it comes to the hekdesh, that never becomes batil. So therefore it's much more chamur. Elomar Rava, but Rava does say, ikashya le, if the one who's asking is going to ask, then hakashya, this he should ask the following question. Vehaloi moal hamasik, when the one who is using this iser hana, in this case, the atzei hekdesh for fuel, so then, when he's he's burning it, then he's being moyal in the hekdesh. V'kol heichadem moal hamasik nafkule lechulin. And whenever somebody who burns that fuel, which is aser bahana, that now is an iser of mi'ila, whereby he makes that atzim now into chulin, ayidei the mi'ila. In which case, when he is now baking the bread, the bread should be mutter. Omar Rapape responded, Hacha, here, ba'atzei shlomim askinon. Valid Rabbi Yehuda. Here we're talking about atzei shlomim, where the atzim themselves, the eitzim that were hekdesh, were then used to buy korban shlomim. And according to Rabbi Yehuda, the Omar hekdesh b'shoigeg mischalel, b'mezid eino mischalel. He says that hekdesh, which was done, which was affected and used b'shoigeg, then it will be considered mischalel, come into chulin, because mi'ila is going to be effective, causing it to then go from hekdesh to chulin, only when it's b'shoigeg. However, b'mezid, eino mischalel, then doesn't have the din of mi'ila, and therefore remains hekdesh. B'mezid, my time aloi. Why not, when it comes to mezid, is it not going to then cause it to come into chulin? Kivan de lab bar mi'ilahi, loy nafik lechulin. Since it's not considered to be me'ila, according to Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, unless it's done b'shoigeg. When he gets hana, he uses something, he's mishtamesh, in iser hekdesh, b'shoigeg, is it me'ila, and therefore comes into chulin, but memezid doesn't have the din of me'ila, whereby it remains hekdesh. So too, he says over here as well, shlomim nami, kivin the lab bar me'ila ninhu, lo nafke l'chulin. Since shlomim is a carbon that is going to be eaten by the bailim, therefore, it doesn't have the same degree of hekdesh. It's going to be kache kalim, whereby also this will not then be going to be used in a way that it will be nafke lechulin. In other words, here also won't go from the case of kodesh into chulin. So therefore, this is the scenario that we're talking about. That's why this type of hekdesh, the atzei hekdesh, which is going to then be the fuel to this oven that will bake the bread, will then render the bread into an iser of hana. Says the Gemara, asking now on this principle, on this premise, is it so that anybody who will then burn will use the iser of hekdesh, that itself will then bring about chulin? Because if he's going to be moal, in the case of shoygeg, you're going to say that's going to then bring an iser mi'ila, ask the Gemara, and therefore it'll bring to chulin. V'ho Tanya kol hanisrof, and it states in regard to all that needs to be burned because it became posul. Efron muter chutz me'atzei ashero. All of the afer will be considered to be muter, with the exception of that which is burning for atzei ashira, which is avodah in iser avodah zara, that is more chamor in regards to the iser hana. The Efer Hekdesh La'olam Aser. And here it states in this Mishnah that the Efer Hekdesh also will remain Aser. So how do you say that indeed it will bring to Chulin? Says the Gemara, Amorami Barachamo, Kigon Shenofla Deleka Me'ileho, Be'atze Hekdesh, Deleka Inish Denimo. Because over here we're talking about a scenario where it became aflamed. It became on fire, but not with a person himself setting the fire. He didn't use it, in this case, let's say, for fuel, but rather a fire caused on its own to then eat up, consume this atzei hekdesh. In such a scenario, then there's no me'ila, and therefore that's what the Mishnah is talking about. In the scenario where it's not going to then be moal ayedei a person, then it will remain hekdesh even after it's going to be burnt, and that's what it means. Vafilu hekdesh la'olam aser. Rav Shmaya gives an alternative answer. We're talking about that which is Toan Geniza. That means to say the ashes of the ashes of that which is going to be considered to be Trumas Hadeshen, that will remain Aser. And we have a drasha, the Tanya, like the Brisa teaches us. V'samoi, when it talks about the Trumas Hadeshen, takes the ashes that were taken from the Mizbeach, has to be placed by the floor of the Mizbeach. And there it states, V'samoi etzel ha-Mizbeach. The Brisa explains, V'samoi benachas. You have to place those ashes benachas. V'samoi kuloi, the entire thing. V'samoi shelo yifazer. It shouldn't then be scattered about. From here we learn that the ashes themselves, even after placing them on the floor next to the Mizbeach, are aser behana.